The Naboo Affair. =RK=. Part 4. Staging Point Anvil. Naboo. Maximilian Veer's hand went to his breast where 3 ribbons gleamed in the morning sun. He could still scarcely believe their presence. They designated him as a brand new captain, a promotion that came with a new job. Veers was the unlucky sod chosen as the new commander of the damned 29th. Technically that was GAR's 29th Independent Regiment. In practice, Veers had to uncroft an unholy mess that was a composite understrength battalion made of the survivors from its parent formation. Ever since the invasion of Naboo began, the 29th had been impossibly, unlikely unlucky. They got mauled again and again, with officers finding themselves on the wrong end of blaster shot, artillery and air strikes, and 2 companies even got afoul of an orbital strike that wiped them out without leaving a trace. The most senior officer left in the 29th was a young lieutenant with even less experience than Veers had. With casualties across the planet mounting, there simply weren't enough officers to go around. Apparently someone put a good word or 2 in Maximilian's file, which was a mixed blessing. He got promoted all right. It looked like it was going to be short-lived, however. Veers had been in command for mere 3 hours, not enough time to even get to know his subordinates, much less begin fixing the mess that the 29th turned out to be after suffering crippling casualties and their luck struck again. Staging area Anvil was supposed to be secure. That's why the 29th was pulled back into it so they could recuperate and rebuild. Someone forgot to tell that to the separatists. The space battle that has been going on and off for a whole month now was heating. Orbital strikes lanced down, gutting both Republic and Confederate units, and the airspace was choked with dueling fighters while bombers attempted to slip under the massive furball above Theed. As far as Maximilian could tell, that was par for the course on Naboo. Ever since the clankers landed there had been fighting all over the place, with the most vicious being in the vicinity of the capital. As his luck would have it, that's where he ended after leaving Geonosis and getting a couple of weeks of R&R. Veers did earn his new rank, though there were times he wished it wasn't so. The price was the virtual destruction and disbandment of the armor battalion he landed with. The 5 crews that survived the fighting were broken and sent to different formations. He was permitted to keep only his driver along with their light hover tank, and that might have been a blessing. There were only 3 such machines still operational in the 29th, with the rest of their forces being walkers and few locally built APCs. Hound Actual, Overlord Actual. Be advised, multiple CIS ships are entering the atmosphere and heading towards Theed. We believe they intend to use their mass and shielding to attempt bypassing the capital's defenses and land troops within the city. The 29th is to pull back into Theed and link up with 1st Guards Division. Maximilian blanched. This was Ryloth all over again. Whoever was running the clankers apparently saw what Vale did over there and decided it was time to try it on the Republic. A crash-landing capital ship, even a frigate if it hit the ground mostly intact, could cleave through most of the defensive lines around the capital. If one of those suppy big battle wagons made it down in one piece, it could disgorge a whole army before a proper response could be mounted. What the criff was the fleet doing? Bloody flyboys. Overlord Actual, Hound Actual. Roger that. Hound elements will proceed to Theed ASAP. Hound Actual, over. All Hound elements, Hound Actual, we've got a new job. Maximilian sighed. With he 29th's luck, it would be miracle if he saw the next sunrise. =Arche equals. Sulu River. Below Theed. Naboo. Ouch time again. General Roos Tupples groaned. He shook his head, yet stars continued to dance in front of his eyes. Allah trilled in pain, then the cannons mounted on its back roared, and a moment later something exploded downrange. Rapid-fire Archer emplacements thundered, and the echo of their fury crashed upon Roos. He groaned and spluttered when dirty water splashed over his face. It tasted vile, of blood, metal and chemicals he didn't want to think about. General. A militia gun grabbed his forearm and pulled up Tupples to his unsteady feet. The warrior splashed something into his eyes, and suddenly Roos could see even if the liquid felt like it tried to burn its way into his skull. Report. Tupples wheezed. He frantically looked around. The defensive line dug in around the riverbed below Theed was in tatters. Separatist tanks were advancing, hovering just above the water with speeder-mounted droids acting as screens. Republic walkers and infantry poured fire across the river, and lures were getting into position to flank the offending enemy machines. Good. Someone kept their head in all this chaos. The militia gun shook him and pointed at something behind. Ruse turned and his eyes widened impossibly. Big ouch. The general muttered in sick fascination. So that's what knocked him out. There was a huge ship, bigger than anything he had seen with his own eyes, sitting just a couple of kilometers from their position. An enormous trench, wider and probably deeper than Salu River, was dug into the plan and through the concentric lines of Republic and Gungan defenses. Tarples didn't even want to think how many good people were crushed to paste by that thing. From where he stood, Ruse could see small figures crawling above the ship and heading straight into Theed. The upper level of the behemoth was just tall enough for them to jump down on the plateau where the Naboo city was built. That wasn't all, as a nearby explosion and a keening scream from a mortally wounded Lua reminded him. The Allied defenses were broken and the machines were pouring through everything they had into the breach. That ship was bad enough. Tarples couldn't allow the enemy to gain another avenue of approach if he could help it. "Rally to me," the general roared into his comm. "Hold the riverbed." A troop of militia guns appeared from the tree line and slammed their shields into the soft soil to brace them better. Then they mounted their blaster carbines, courtesy of the Republic, to special attachments hooked into the shields, and opened fire from behind their cover. The bulky silhouettes of GAR heavy troopers moved on the other bank, and large laser bolts and missiles raced across the water to strike the approaching separatist tanks. Vultures screamed through the air in a diving bombing run. They braved the rapture fire, and the thin forest belt across the river became a screaming inferno. A damaged vulture caught fire and spun out of control, only to crash through an unfortunate clone squad before jamming itself under an advancing walker. The following explosion tore apart both machines. A friendly bomber turned a pair of tanks into burning wrecks that soon disappeared into the river. Then it was shredded by a hidden AA emplacement before it could nail a third. Tarples was screaming orders, hoping to motivate his Gungans and be heard. The line had to hold. "Go. Take that rocket launcher." He pushed one of his warriors towards the charred remains of a Republic squad while shooting at the droid speeders flying above the river. The water itself was on fire now, and more airstrikes from both sides lit up Salu's banks. The ground shook and the general was back on the muddy ground. His head spun and his vision was blurry. Yet he still could see the grounded enemy ship. There were all manners of weapons mounted upon it, and they were spinning, aiming. "The biggest ouch," Tarples hissed. He glared at the donut-shaped craft and pointed his blaster at it. Somehow the weapon remained in his clutches as he was knocked off his feet for second time. Ruse knew it was useless, but didn't care. He spat his defiance and pressed the trigger again and again. The ship exploded into fire, and Tarples knew he and his men were dead. It was firing, and there was no way to hide from such weapons. Ruse frowned. He was still alive. This couldn't be the afterlife, right? The general blinked at the separatist ship. It was on fire. Streaks of light were hammering it from the air. He looked up and saw a swarm of Republic fighters descending from the heavens. They were dying by the dozens as the grounded ship brought every gun it could to bear upon them. Artillery, both Gungan and Republic, arched through his skies and slammed into the huge eyesore. Bombard tanks crawled to the edge of the plateau, and blinding lances of light speared into the beast's hide. Ruse laughed, suddenly overcome by battle lust. Even such a ship couldn't kill him. The line would hold. "To me. Fight!" Tarples screamed as loud as he could. Cannons thundered, and the thin line of militia guns nearby were torn into bloody chunks as more separatist tanks came through the burning river. A missile slammed just below the turret of the closest one. Its warhead sliced through the armor as if it wasn't there, and the tank simply blew up. Its friends wasted no time and turned the Gungan that killed their buddy into vapor. Ruse looked wildly around. He had to stop those things. His eyes paused on a lone Lua with its crew turned into steaming piles of offal, and he sprinted towards the living weapon emplacements while the tanks were busy murdering a squad of Republic troopers. Tarples got to the animal and guided it until the cannons were aimed at the tanks. He was going to have time for just a single salvo, so he carefully took aim, heedless of the danger. The nearer tank shot at him and somehow missed, with the shell passing between Ruse and the animal, scorching his face and arms. The general didn't miss. The 4 cannons mounted upon the Lua's back barked as one, and the tank staggered as a quarter of tiny holes appeared in its side. Then it blew up. The last thing Tarples saw was the flash of that explosion. There was light, and he was flying through the air. His whole world was burning, and he tried to scream through the impossible heat burning through his skin. Ruse hit something, and then there was only blessed darkness. =RK=. Hammer Actual. Salu River. Below Theed. Naboo. Maximilian knew that the 29th's luck wouldn't be striking again. His first command as a captain was gone, and barring a miracle he would follow them soon. That battleship landed in the middle of his battalion, and the mere after effects of its crash was enough to wipe almost everyone in the 29th. Only a pair of hover tanks and a single Walker survived, and then the curse struck again. A shot-down Vulture of all things took out the Walker. Then Veers was left with just a pair of light tank to somehow stem a tide of determined separatist tanks coming over the river. So much for getting to Theed. Go right, Maximilian shouted to his driver while cranking the turret to the left so he could engage the incoming tanks. A shell exploded against their shield, then another, leaving them vulnerable to a follow-up shot. Maximilian's return fire gutted the leading Confederate tank. Then their hides were saved by a crunchy of all things. A missile slammed into the back of the enemy machine. Veers knew he wouldn't be able to thank whoever saved them, because mere seconds later the position that missile came from was turned into a dead zone by an airstrike. The pair of vultures responsible for it came screaming low above the water, and Maximilian's last remaining tank was torn apart by their laser cannons. He knew his turn was next when salvation came into the form of a Naboo starfighter that blew a vulture out of the sky with a missile, then blasted the other with its cannons. The fighter made a barrel roll before getting shredded by enemy AA fire coming from behind a nearby crop of trees. Overlord actual, Hammer actual. Veers tried to contact command again, but ever since that battleship landed every channel was jammed. The captain cursed. He couldn't call help, and the enemy was pushing even more tanks over the river. His thumb was numb from holding the trigger button down. The ammo was actually running low, yet there was no end to the enemy, nor a sight of any reinforcements. Get us behind those trees to the left, Maximilian snapped. He couldn't meet the coming tanks head-on. Oh, he and his driver were already dead, just as the rest of the 29th, but if he played his cards right, Veers could drag a few more of the Clanks to their tin version of the Karelian Hells. Besides, with a bit of luck he might get to avenge the pilot that bought them couple of minutes to live. The hover tank shook as a shell struck its shields. Veers turned the turret to the right and slammed 3 shots at the offending enemy tank. The Confederate machine managed to send another shell at them. It hit 2, but the shield managed to tank it before popping. The Separatist machine wasn't so lucky, and Maximilian scored another kill. As their tank disappeared within the trees, he wondered how many times he became an ace today. Not that it mattered. He was bound to die forgotten in this forsaken valley. The Naboo Affair. =RK=. Part 5. 1st Naboo Royal Guards Division /NRGD1 Theed. Naboo. Hell had come to Naboo for a third time. Gregor Typho had the misfortune to be present and in the middle of it each bloody time. First it was 10 years ago when the Trade Federation invaded. Then he fought beside his uncle Panaka to free his people. Gregor believed all the wounds he suffered then, including the loss of his left eye, were worth it, because he contributed to the victory no matter how small that contribution was. The second time was just a few months ago. He really didn't have to sacrifice anything then. Typho got lucky not to be exposed to the Blue Shadow, something millions of his people couldn't claim. All too many of them died. Others got sick enough to be scared for years to come, perhaps to life thanks to complications of the virus. All he could do then was cooperate with the Republic and hope that a Sith of all people could save Naboo. Said Sith actually delivered. His home was left scared, its society torn asunder, yet Naboo preserved. Everyone knew someone who got sick and died. Too many people lost family and friends. Gregor was no exception. His nieces didn't make it even after being lucky enough to get into stasis pods until the cure could be developed. The Blue Shadow killed them with complications caused to their systems. Gregor would have gladly died in their places, yet the universe didn't work that way. When people began crying for vengeance, when they began blaming their government for lacking the strength to defend them, formed the same enemy for a second time, Typho was torn. He could sympathize. Gregor was angry too. He and everyone in the Royal Security Forces failed the people they were supposed to protect, and there were millions of bodies standing as silent monuments for the magnitude of that failure. Typho wasn't the only one to reach a certain conclusion then. He simply was the highest placed. Security forces, they simply weren't enough. The RSF could deal with smugglers, the odd pirate or mercenary, petty crime. They could protect their government officials, but that was it. Keeping Naboo safe from a real army, that was out of their league. They didn't have the manpower, equipment and often the training to face such an enemy. Better security might have been enough to prevent the release of Blue Shadow. More manpower and preparations might have been enough to evacuate a significant portion of the people affected beyond Theed. The citizens of Naboo agreed. They demanded changes, cried for vengeance. In few short weeks the horror of Blue Shadow shattered the pacifism that was practically integral to their society and culture. The Queen and her advisors were frozen in indecision. What their people demanded was unthinkable. Many saw Typhos coming forward and backing the creation of a Royal Naboo army as a betrayal of everything their world stood for. Yet, there were much more people who cheered him. Gregor didn't really care. All he had left was his duty and a vow he made upon his niece's graves, that he would defend Naboo to his dying breath, that he would do his best no matter the consequences, no matter what people thought about him. What did his reputation matter when his people were dying? That's how the Royal Naboo army was born, among controversy, cries of treason and thundering applause. The Republic's help made possible a task that should have taken years to be completed in mere months. The GAR personnel stationed at Naboo to oversee the quarantine forced by Blue Shadow were glad to help him train a freshly recruited army. The Republic was keen on supplying the NRA with equipment and a lot of it was first tier, the same the soldiers on the front lines carried in battle. For a few months, Gregor let himself believe that his efforts would be enough. Naboo could finally protect itself. A month ago the Separatist came and put that bold claim to the test. At least this time General Typho had an enemy he could fight. =RK=. Gregor wasted precious seconds numbly staring at the battleship that just crash-landed at the edge of the plateau where Theed proudly stood. Hatches opened, new exits were blown by massive shaped charges and a whole Separatist army poured into the capital. This is General Typho. Code Black. I say again, Code Black. 1st Royal Guard Division, stand firm and let none pass. Gregor's training kicked in and he began barking orders. A part of him screamed that he should go back to the command center from where he could better coordinate the defense. That was a sensible advice. Gregor ignored it. Besh Company, with me. The general ordered the unit he was inspecting. He thanked Providence for wearing the same medium armor as his soldiers while awake ever since the invasion began. All he had to do was to slam on his helmet, access the command frequencies, and he could command from the front too. That was what Gregor tried to do anyway. The angry hiss of jamming proved that Theed was in bigger trouble than he feared. He considered trying to reach his command post at the palace, but that would take too long. He had to gather as many soldiers as possible and blunt the enemy attack so his officers could have the time to organize a proper response. Gregor smiled. He was actually content with the situation he suddenly found himself in. The enemy was right here and finally he could get at them personally. Besh Company fell in behind the general and its lieutenant got him a security detail who fell into a protective circle around him. He nodded in thanks while trying to cut through the jamming but soon gave that idea as a lost cause. The calms built in his armor simply lacked the juice for such a feat. Lieutenant Winfred, send runners to the nearby barracks. I want backup ASAP. We're going to intercept the droids at the river. Get your demo people ready to drop any bridges they could use to easily cross over. Typho ordered. Sir, are we abandoning half the city? The LT exclaimed. Not if I can help it. Typho emphatically shook his head. They soon linked with a detachment of ISF and couple of patrolling army squads. Couple of minutes later, they came into contact with the enemy. Those weren't all but useless B-1s. Gregor wasn't that lucky. Scatter and take cover, Typho snapped with the LT following a split second later. A full dozen droidekas rolled over the bridge. Besh Company was approaching and they were followed by sprinting commando droids and a marching phalanx of gleaming silver SBs. Among the legion at the back could be seen hulking figures that were at least 3 meters tall and carrying enough weapons to make a tank jealous. The destroyers unfolded but not before 3 got taken out while they were in travel configuration. The rest managed to get on their stubby feet and their shields came to life, protecting them within bubbles of transparent energy. A decade ago, a company of ISF would be all but helpless against this many droidekas without vehicle support. All they could have done was hide, distract the machines and hope to either escape or receive reinforcements. A few months ago, the RSF would have fared better, if they had time to hit the armory. Today was different. Typho's soldiers took aim with practiced ease and opened accurate and devastating fire. Heavy blasters buried the droidekas under a wave of plasma, Grenade launchers fried their shields with iron grenades and it was all over almost as fast as it began. First platoon go, Gregor ordered. Second, provide cover. Third, watch our backs and flanks. Leapfrog forward. Armored humans and murderous droids soon clashed in the middle of one of Theed's bigger bridges. Plasma flew in all directions, laser cannons and railguns tore through air hazed by weapons fire and Typho's people began dying. A commando droid came over the railing and gutted a soldier before the corporal knew he was in danger, but at least the machine was slagged before it could claim another victim. Missiles launched by the large war droids in the back turned the middle of the bridge into a slaughterhouse that wiped out 2 whole squads. A barrage of grenades, mixed heat and iron reaped the first rows of the marching SBs just as they reached the river. Smoke rounds turned the whole bridge in a surreal silver haze that was lit up by red, blue and green balls of plasma. Cover us. A pair of combat engineers totting up backpacks loaded with exploding goodness sprinted low while a whole platoon pumped shot after shot as fast as they could around them. One ran afoul of a railgun round that replaced his head with a faint spray of red mist, yet the other got to the middle of the bridge and removed her backpack. A lumbering figure came trough the smoke and aimed a pair of large cannons at the woman. Its shields absorbed everything Bash Company could throw at it without killing their comrade. "That's for my daughter, you bastards!" the engineer shouted, and she vanished in the middle of a blinding light. The shockwave threw the closer soldiers off their feet and only their armor kept them more or less intact. The explosion was enough to clear the smoke before replacing it with concrete dust and water vapor. About a third of the bridge was simply gone along with the bodies of the 2 engineers and what was left of the soldiers fallen under the missile barrage. "Leave 3rd platoon here to keep them from crossing the hard way," Gregor ordered once he could hear himself over the ringing in his ears. "The rest of you, follow me." He pointed at the next bridge that was half a kilometer downriver. "We're with you, sir," a young voice full of determination declared. The rest of Bash Company roared their agreement. "To whatever end," someone else added. "We'll make the clankers pay." "That we will." Gregor cracked a grim smile. A shadow hiding the sun god distracted him and he looked up. Typho's smile grew feral. There were Republic acclamators descending through the clouds and an almost solid wall of fighters and bombers was coming in front of them. 2 of them had their front ramps open and whole wings of Larts were flying out as a submarine chased by a Leviathan. A sense of relief washed over the general. Perhaps he wasn't going to fail his people for a second time. Not today. =RK=. Part 6. Hangar A1. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. High orbit above Naboo. I took a moment to examine the fully kitted troops standing at attention in the hangar. This was Alpha Regiment, 501st Legion, and they were all trained to take down Jedi. Rex and the few old hands stood at attention in front of the rest, and beside them were 3 fuming figures, my unlucky minions. "Madoran, you're deploying to assist Lucre Hulk that made a crash landing just outside of Theed. Your orders are simple: take control of engineering and scran the main reactor so the clankers can't blow it up, the city and most of the continent. Go." I glared at the trio of former Jedi. My minions grumbled but obeyed and got on a nearby waiting assault shuttle. The moment they were on, the ramp closed and the small ship shot out of the hangar like a bat out of hell, and a squadron of Torrents followed after it to act as escorts. "Rex, you're going after them. Make sure the mission is successful, and if they go on the deep end, terminate them. Give me a fire team as an honor guard, then go secure that ship." "We'll get it done, sir." The commander saluted. "Echo, Boomer, you heard the general. Fall in with him." Rex ordered the only 2 notable troopers from the 501st to make it from Camino with him. The rest either died when facing the Old Republic Jedi or simply didn't reach an evacuation flight before the bombardment hit. "Sir." "Yes, sir." The clones chorused as one and fell in around me along with their squads. "Good. Go get them and don't get yourselves killed. That's an order I expect you to follow." I cracked a smile. They were my men, through and through. "Orders, sir?" Echo asked. "We're going to meet the Queen Neatni and figure out what the criff is happening around here. Keep an eye out for clankers. Theed's defense perimeter was breached," I explained on the way to our ride down another assault shuttle. We got in, strapped in our seats, and I called the pilot to get us moving and ensure I got patched into the shuttle's sensors. On the way down I wanted to see the situation with my own eyes while thinking over Tigelina's short report over the utter mess I was about to walk in. The Admiral's words still rang in my head and I was trying to wrap my mind around the situation. Thanks to my time with the Empire, I knew very well that what I knew of this galaxy barely scratched the surface. The current situation was a very good reminder of that fact. I couldn't recall there being many notable worlds in the sectors surrounding Naboo. That was actually correct in reality too, technically. Couple of days after I took command of the Republic forces and system, various guests began arriving at Naboo. Tigelinas told me. I've had to attend some receptions at the palace, which was useful in figuring out what was happening. He explained with a frown. Some of them brought friends too. That's where about a third of the fleet under my command comes from. There wasn't a single world closer than Sullust that could rival anything important in the core. However, there were a lot of populated planets nearby, some of which had been in development for thousands of years. Most of them couldn't compete with the big names in shipbuilding and heavy industry, so it was usually cheaper to import a lot of things. Still, there were worlds with respectable levels of industry, including at least one with decent shipbuilding capabilities. It quickly became obvious that the Queen has been in negotiation with her local friends. I'll bet anything you want that General Typho had something to do with it. He was one of the primary driving forces behind the establishment of the Naboo Royal Army, and he's a realist. He knows that Naboo simply lacks the industry and time to build it to sustain their army alone, much less to build a force that could challenge an invasion alone. They needed allies and not just us. That revelation didn't make him particularly happy. It was obvious, and Tigelinas didn't even try to hide how he felt at that slight. To his credit, the Admiral simply scowled but continued to report in a professional manner. There were some running preemptively, Tigelinas sneered, others who actually tried to stop the separatists and retreated with whatever they could salvage when it became clear the situation was untenable. It was obvious which group had his respect. We passed through a layer of thick clouds and the plain where Theed was built became visible below us. I could make many pillars of smoke rising in the air and creating a dark haze all over the region around the capital. Airstrikes were hammering the downed Lucre hulk, and the battleship was still able to spit defiance from its remaining weapons. The level of danger I could sense through the force was rather low, so unless something really went to hell, my minions should be able to secure the ship. Rex would ensure they wouldn't do something regrettable. Explosions were still flashing below all around Theed and even within the city itself. My 10 acclimators were descending and hammering any concentration of enemy forces they could safely hit, and their larts were swarming to reinforce whatever friendly units were still alive down there. There had been one hell of a fight on Naboo, and I regretted I missed the show. Instead of getting stuck in with the enemy on the ground, I would have to deal with political minefield. Tigelinas' report guaranteed it. We've got leaders and ambassadors from dozens of systems from not only Shamel sector but those surrounding it. Even defectors or resistance leaders from separatist-aligned worlds, though those are kept under close watch. The Admiral told me. The notable ones? Let's see. Well, there's Rendelia. They were neutral until the blue shadow was released. That stunt pushed a lot of neutrals in our camp. Even a few separatist-aligned worlds, or so they claim. Tigelinas shrugged. There might be a grain of truth there too, but Rendelia first. That was the first neutral to come crawling back into the fold. Their Prime Minister fled here with his family, most of their defense fleet and 2 battalions worth of security forces. Officially, he's here to support Naboo. The Admiral snorted. Just like most of the rest, he came to garner favor with the Chancellor by protecting his home world. He hoped that the Queen could put a good word about his loyalty and the aid he provided. The same story was true for most of those gathered in Theed. I knew that each of them had multiple reasons to be here. However, protecting Palpatine's homeworld and the boons that could be reaped from such an action were very high in the list. Unofficially, the Prime Minister didn't want to turn Rendelia into battlefield, so he came here with as much of his military as possible. Next, well, let's go with our notable turncoats, former Senator Bog Divinian from Neurali. The bastard threw his lot with the separatists because he was in the Commerce Guild's pockets. He claims that he saw the light thanks to Blue Shadow and actually began a civil war on his home world. I dispatched a battle group to check up what the bloody hell was happening there, and my people helped kick the separatist out of there. For the time being, Neurali is in Republic hands and the good senator is on Naboo with most of his navy, so we could keep them in line. He no doubt hopes to prove how loyal he is and that his change of heart is genuine. Typho told me that the ground forces he brought actually distinguished themselves, though most of them died in the process. It remains to be seen if that will keep. Neurali was notable. That planet had been hit by an economic downrun a few years before the war began that put it firmly in the grip of the Commerce Guild. Their investments revitalized the economy and most of their industry was converted into military production. If we could keep that place in our hand and keep the order, it was going to be a useful asset. Master Mendelin reports his team breached into the ship and they're on their way to the reactor. I got the message relayed by lasercom through the Freedom. There was still too much jamming thanks to that battleship to easily use regular comms. A frigate pack flew above us on a ground support mission and the banks of the river passing through Theed erupted into flashes of light. More frigates descended and began scything through what vultures were still in the air in this hemisphere. Joanna and Tigellinus had things well in hand it seemed. My thoughts went back to the report I got before leaving for Theed. There was Ugal, a small agrarian world whose chancellor managed to flee a Cis invasion with a few ships and a bit of security forces. The same was true for Carlinus, the source of a supposedly famous Carlini tea. Their prime minister, one Jorge Barras, and who named him after my former master, got away too. He managed to extract roughly half of their system defense navy and a battalion of marines. That story repeated itself multiple times, the wealthy trade colony of Trevifor, where the CEOs were spirited away by their mercenary security and came to Naboo with most of their navy and the contents of their accounts. Trielist, another trade world with an advanced anti-piracy fleet and a third of it survived to reach this world along with their hegemon Mario Fanetti. The same story could be told about at least a dozen more systems. There were a few notable instances, which Tigellinus made sure to point out. Rintone and Seltos. He told me. The former is important, the biggest single shipbuilder in the area besides Salust and Iriadu. They're on our side and still holding strong because the separatists are concentrating their efforts here. That wasn't lost on their leadership and Rintone's ruling families dispatched an ambassador along with a strong task force and 3 regiments of their National Guard. They were quite useful in holding this place. Tigellinus sounded like he had a high opinion of those forces. They hoped to get enough Republic reinforcements thanks to their contribution in protecting Naboo to ensure their world won't fall. Seltos has very close ties to Rintone and usually supports their decisions, which is the case now. They're producing food and some very useful minerals that are exclusively sold to Rintone's shipyards. Seltos did send a representative too along with few ships and a battalion of troops. When you think about it, with the exception of Rintone, every single force, no matter ground or naval that arrived at Naboo was quite small in absolute numbers. However, there were a lot of them and combined they were quite respectable. Or would be if they could be shaped into a cohesive fighting force instead of a multiple separate units. There were 3 more notable systems Tigellinus told me about and one, while having nothing useful in military or industrial terms was actually a great boon. Alas, Major. The Admiral grinned when he told me about it. One of the biggest and most famous resort worlds in the Republic. The Separatist invaded it to capture people for leverage and intelligence. While that will have some unpleasant consequences because they did get some important people or their relatives, many were spirited away by a group of CEOs running the major resorts there and their security forces. They managed to flee to Naboo and are currently honored guests of the Queen. Well, that was a huge complication and a big opportunity. Either way it was going to be a big pain in my butt. There are just 2 more important systems you need to know about, General. First, Keth. It's technically an uninhabited piece of real estate, but it has extensive asteroid rings with many useful minerals. The mining guilds there have extensive fixed defenses and a large anti-piracy fleet which still holds the system despite multiple separatist incursions. They sent representatives offering resources for credits and GAR help in keeping the place out of Confederate hands. Finally, there's Rugosta. I'm not sure if you're aware, but that's one of the few worlds in the region with a lot of heavy industry. They produce vehicles, as well as vehicle and starship components and electronics. We've got a large task force there, which still holds the place with the aid of the local navy. Their government dispatched forces to Naboo for obvious reasons. We were almost at the palace and I had a pack of self-serving politicians waiting for me. The primary reason most of them were here was to get on the Chancellor's good side by helping keep Naboo safe. With Palpy dead and the region cut off from the core, the only thing likely keeping them more or less in line was Tigellinus and now mine fleets. No matter what they claimed, with news of Corellia's fall and after Camino was lost, at least some of them would have second thoughts about being on the Republic's side. For all any of us knew, The Republic might be flying apart at the core because no one with political experience in the Senate I had access to could tell me who the next chancellor was likely to be and if they had a prayer of holding the Republic together. I had my job cut off for me. Tarkin would be landing shortly, and between the two of us we had to somehow convince the local politicians that gathering behind us was the smart thing to do. And we had to make sure that they would support us willingly because currently we lacked the assets to ensure long-term compliance with military might. We had a lot of ships, but there was no way we could keep them in the region for long. The friendly systems here simply lacked the infrastructure to support such forces without regular resupply from the core. Iriadu and the worlds aligned with it could help, but for that to happen, nah, that was crazy idea. The shuttle landed and I focused my mind on the task awaiting me. I could not afford to make any mistakes today. The Naboo Affair =RK=, Part 7. Audience Chamber, Royal Palace, Theed, Naboo. The reception my party received was a mixed bag. Queen Niaatni and her court were quite happy to see me. Their emotions surged in waves of relief and gratitude mixed with fear for their people and weariness. Many of the guests on the other hand radiated distrust, greed and despair. They saw an opportunity in my arrival, a threat too. The more patriotic ones were terrified for their worlds, though I couldn't judge if it was merely the fear of an invasion or the knowledge that right now the separatists had a free reign in their homes. Others felt much more tangible and understandable fear, that for their very lives with Confed forces fighting within the city. The audience chamber was a delicious head-spinning cauldron of emotions that by itself would be enough to make me drunk with power if I let it. Beside me, Tarkin felt a tingle of apprehension. He knew precisely what hinged on this meeting and wasn't confident we could get away with making any useful deal. I shared his sentiments. Diplomacy was usually a very sensitive and time-consuming process. A single first meeting, there was nothing but a way to judge the other side. If left in the hands of the diplomats, it would usually be between low-level functionaries and the only outcome would be deciding the avenue of a real meeting and if lucky hammering the most relevant details to make a proper summit possible. There were other, more direct ways to execute diplomacy. It usually meant one side held significantly more power and wasn't afraid to utilize it. I was familiar with that kind. Used it in the past to great effect. Technically that was the case today too. Military speaking, Naboo and everyone in the region were criffed without Republic aid. Yet, we were cut from our military logistics network, which meant that sooner than later our ships might turn into useless slabs of metal drifting through space. We needed raw resources, ammo, replacement parts, fuel. The list went on and on. Even combined, the politicians gathered in this room couldn't give us what we needed to continue operating in this region of space with more than a fraction of the fleets gathered above Naboo. With many of their worlds occupied or contested, the situation was even worse. We were going to be in impasse. I knew that while Tigelinus was halfway through his summary of the situation. The politicians would want me to liberate and secure their worlds. They would demand it, and if I refused, at least some of them would seek alternative arrangements, and the only alternative was the enemy. The issue was, as things stood, I simply couldn't do what they needed. At best we could kick the separatists from their worlds, but that by itself would simply put my fleet in untenable position while even shorter on supplies. Once the Confederacy rallied, they would be able to defeat us in detail. That was the reality of the situation. At least few other people in the room knew it, yet they needed me to pull off another miracle, otherwise whatever support they still had for the Republic would evaporate. Why the criff did I have to end in this bloody future? None of my musings showed on my face. I kept a blank mask on, and when I came in front of the throne where the Queen sat, I respectfully bowed. Queen Niaatni, it's an honor to meet you again, Your Majesty. I'm relieved to find Naboo still holding. I spoke in a relieved tone, playing for the public. The honor is ours, General Vale. You are always welcome on Naboo after the services you did to our people. The Queen spoke in a regal tone. The small smile she flashed me appeared to be genuine. We're relieved to see the rumors of your dead at Kamino are wrong. Yet, duty demands we request answers, dear General. What happened at Kamino? The crowd, which had been whispered furiously from the moment I entered, was suddenly deadly silent. Everyone was closely scrutinizing me and straining to hear what explanation I was going to give. It was a very good thing I had a cover story crafted and rehearsed with everyone who survived Kamino. The only dissenter was Shark T, who fumed in the recesses of my mind. It was time to play for the public. I cast down my eyes and placed a picture of deep, heart-wrenching regret on my face. My shoulders slumped a bit and I began speaking in an emotional voice. Treason most foul, Your Majesty. I let a bit of anger enter my voice. We were betrayed at Camino. When I arrived, the world was on the verge of falling. Jedi strike teams spearheaded the separatist invasion of Tepoka City. The few loyalists Jedi attempted to stop the tide but failed. When I led a counterattack, Masters Ransisis and Shark T attempted to assassinate me. Murmurs of confusion, disbelief and even hatred erupted all around me. While I survived the encounter, the battle was time-consuming and exhausting. There simply weren't enough ground forces with the task force I led to Camino to stem the tide. By the time I defeated the traitors, Tepoka was on the verge of being overrun. I sighed. Giving the order to abandon the city and evacuate everyone who could reach a transport was one of the hardest things I've done in my life. I spoke and thanks to the Force my voice rang with the truth. I ignored the increasingly louder murmurs and the odd shout of denial. The atmosphere in the chamber became thick with anticipation and building anger. The evacuation was still in progress when I returned to my flagship and ordered area denial strikes against vital infrastructure that had to be denied to the separatist. They couldn't be allowed to capture intact Camino's cloning facilities or data banks with strategic Republic intelligence. While the fleet positioned to execute said order, I used my ability of battle meditation to coordinate my forces and help not only more people to evacuate but hold the orbitals for as long as possible because by that point our defensive lines in space were collapsing. I let another sight and let my face wrench with real pain as I recalled experiencing the death of billions. That was a mistake. I ground out showing the anger I felt at feeling Bodhi just before my arrival at Camino. I paused to gather my thoughts, or so it seemed. It was mostly for effect so the tension could build up even higher. What happened, General? Queen Niaupni asked gently. The Jedi assaulting Camino had a countermeasure prepared for my battle meditation, I admitted in a pain-wrenched voice. Less than a minute after I utilized my ability, just after the surgical strikes at vital infrastructure commenced, the Jedi traitors unleashed it. I closed my eyes and put an agonized mask on my face. It nearly drove me insane along with everyone I was influencing through my battle meditation. All my soldiers could do was roughly follow the last orders they got. I felt everyone dying on Camino, the people connected to me did the same, and then the bombardment hit. By the time I could regain a semblance of control, Camino was a dead world, suffering shot after shot from gunners who could do nothing but press the trigger while their minds were flayed. The fleet was in tatters and the only thing we could do was flee while the separatists pressed their advantage. It took us weeks to escape pursuit and mentally recover enough to risk another engagement. That's when we made our way to Eriadu for resupply and repairs. I finished my tale. The chamber exploded in angry shouts, stunned exclamations and cries for justice. Some wanted my head on a pike, others were horrified and supportive. There were opportunists seeing a golden chance, people who were infuriated at another act of treason by the Jedi, and most notably, a sheen of fear and disgust at what happened to us at Camino. I had to fight not to show the mirth I was experiencing. Putting a believable story in people's minds for Camino was one of my most important goals here, and that at least seemed to be successful enough. I can confirm that every word General Vale just told you is the truth. Tarkin spoke in a haunted voice. We all felt everyone on Camino die. Every death of our comrades in space as the Separatists tore into our fleets while we were incapacitated. I don't know what exactly the Jedi did, but one moment we were doing our best to stop the enemy, then Wolf trailed off. Something tore open in our minds. We could feel everyone dying. If it wasn't for the General, I have no for sure we all would have gone insane. Dear General, you have our condolences and support. Queen Niaupni spoke from her heart. Whatever Naboo could do for you and your people, consider it done. You have my sincere thanks, Your Majesty. I made sure that my voice hitched with emotion. Your kindness and that of your people won't be forgotten. Now it was time for the hard part. How the crap was I supposed to ensure that these people would continue supporting the Republic for the time being? Or perhaps I should make sure that they didn't. For all I knew, the Republic was a lame duck. I had no faith in the Senate doing what had to be done to win without Palpatine keeping a tight rein on them. What should I do then? For the time being, not only I but my people back on Mandalore needed the Republic. This was going to suck. =RK=. Part 8. Audience Chamber. Royal Palace. Feed. Naboo. My palms tingled in anticipation when I imagined frying every single politician surrounding me. Their screams would be delicious and I would show no mercy. The dark side edged me on with promises of power and never again dealing with such pathetic excuses of sentient beings. It was bloody tempting to unleash my power and turn the whole chamber into a tomb. Paint the walls red too while I was at it. It would do wonders for my fraying nerves. Instead, I continued to keep my expression carefully blank. It's mighty convenient is all I'm saying. Representative Zurch, who was chosen to speak for those who managed to escape from Alassa Major, shrugged and gave me an oily smile. Through the force the man felt like a bit of oozing slime. He reminded me of one of Barras' more irritating minions. Only a Jedi might be able to confirm what the general told us about Kamino, however all Jedi present there either died or turned traitor. It's suspicious, not to mention convenient. We all got the transmission from Coruscant about the Jedi treason, someone shouted from the back of the crowd filling up the chamber. A GAR officer no one has heard of. We haven't received a single transmission from the Senate or the new Chancellor. If Palpatine is indeed dead, Zurch continued to stir trouble. Surely by now the Senate must have elected a new Chancellor. Their silence is foreboding. I mentally debated the merits of choking the life out of him in front of everyone. Back in the day doing so would have been expected, necessary even to show I hadn't gone suddenly soft. Here and now? I had to talk with the worm. It was utterly frustrating. That's correct, Representative. Instead of murdering the crap out of him, I gave him something that might be mistaken for a genuine smile. Thank you for reminding us all that we're currently cut off from the Republic. My words caused a lot of dark grumbling. What are you going to do about it, General? Prime Minister Sloane from Rindelia demanded. He was one of those who seemingly bought my story, yet were antagonistic anyway. His actions were opportunistic, cowardly, yet my read on him told me the man was a patriot. Rindelia lacked the forces to keep the separatists out of their world if they came knocking, so he pulled out as much of their small army along with the Navy and came here, to make a difference. There was a reason why Tigellinus confided he had placed those forces in such positions that they could be easily taken apart if they turned on the Republic. Sloane wanted to have his cake and eat it too, a commendable attitude. However, in the current situation it wasn't likely to work. A very good question, Prime Minister. I graced the man with my best smile. I'll be honest with you all. Before arriving at Naboo, my plans were to gather as many of the surviving Republic forces here as practical and continue making my way to the core. At best, if there was a significant friendly presence still holding out, I might have reinforcing it before going on my way with the bulk of the fleet. My words were met with a few seconds of silence before the chamber erupted in indignant screams. Accusations of cowardice, treason and cries cursing the Republic did their best to deafen me. Beside me, Tarkin groaned. I had the feeling that he was ready to facepalm at my blunt admission. Almost all the leaders and ambassadors were infuriated by my words. There were just a handful of people who, while angry, took a moment or two to think about why I chose such course of action. The Queen had a frown on her painted face but kept her temper in check. Apparently in her book I earned the benefit of the doubt when I brought back the key ingredient for the Blue Shadow cure. I fought the temptation to use the Force to silence the chaos but thought better of it. I couldn't afford to antagonize those people too much if I wanted to achieve something constructive in here. I kept telling myself that the option to abandon this bunch and head for the core was still very much on the table, and damn the long-term consequences. I wondered if those fools would force my hand anyway. That's enough. Niaatni's voice snapped like a whip. We will have you behave as the adult sentience you are. Her voice thundered around the chamber, no doubt made louder by equipment built in her throne. The Queen earned herself more than a few glares and some unflattering muttering, yet her guests began quieting down. Good. Niaatni nodded in satisfaction once the noise was down to tolerable level. General Vale, please explain your reasoning. I'll be blunt, Your Majesty. I'm no diplomat accustomed to fencing with words. I turned around to look over the gathered people and pointed at them. I'll tell you a truth. One you all know, though it's not pretty, nor diplomatic. As long as we're cut off from the industry and manpower in the core, your worlds and people are of little consequence for the outcome of the war. The Republic ships that Admiral Tigellinus managed to amass above Naboo, the magnificent defense of this system he carried over the course of the last month, they won't be relevant for long. Those ships that kept the separatists from harming Naboo, even worse, the same ships and crews who fought and died to keep the enemy's attention away from your worlds. They need supplies, ammunition, parts and fuel. Replacement crews for the casualties suffered in defense of Shemel and the surrounding sectors. It is a hard, cold universe we live in. Tarkin stepped beside me. Some of you know me. I've warned the people of Eriadu and our neighbors that a storm was coming. Most refused to listen. All the preparations we did, all the ships and defenses we managed to build, they helped true. However, if it wasn't for General Vale fighting his way through hundreds of enemy ships to come relieve us, Eriadu would have fallen. If it wasn't for him, I would have died at Kamino along with the fleet that just broke the siege of Naboo. Even as I wear this uniform, Tarkin rapped his knuckles over his heart just below the ribbon signifying his rank and notable medals. I can't help it but feel resentful towards the Republic. If it wasn't for Republic ships and crews fighting and dying at Eriadu, my home would be occupied. If it wasn't for them fighting like demons at Kamino, I would have died there. Yet, the very fact those sacrifices were necessary and that many more must be done before we could enjoy peace once again, proves that there's something terribly wrong with the Republic. I nodded in an obvious agreement while my mind spun. We didn't have any time to plan how to handle this mess. We really couldn't because we were flying mostly blind, yet time was against us. Today I needed to know if something could be done about these people and their worlds, or should I be preparing to abandon Naboo. The separatists would recover soon. Unless we overestimated their numbers in the region, they could still concentrate potentially overwhelming force against us. Win or lose fighting it would confine me to this part of the galaxy, because after that I doubted I would have enough ships left to reach friendly space to the galactic east. Still, the question remained. What was Tarkin thinking? This wasn't the place to openly criticize the Republic. Or was it? Many of those people justifiably felt abandoned. The Republic couldn't protect them and the Navy simply left instead of fighting for most of their worlds. Oh, it was the right military decision, there was no doubt about it. Even if they believed in that fact, I knew they would find it hard to care, especially those whose home worlds were under separatist occupation. The Republic abandoned us. The hegemon, what's his name, snapped. What's the use of the Republic when during the First War it finds itself in living memory it abandons us? I don't care if you have good reasons for it. They might be good for the core, for the Republic as a whole, but they certainly aren't good enough for my people who are suffering while we waste time talking. That was surprising. For all intents and purposes the man was supposed to be a dictator if I interpreted Tigellinus' words about him right. However, he was an autocrat who actually appeared to care about his people. I could feel it in the way he spoke. He wasn't pissed off because his seat of power was taken from him. He was afraid about his subjects. While not exactly uncommon, most dictators I've dealt with in the past seldom cared about the bulk of their people, though the majority of the successful ones could fake it very well in public. It did. We knew what would happen. We knew that those we left without protection to the dubious mercy of the separatists would hate us for it and would give crap all about our reasons. I admitted. That gained me even more nasty looks and curses. We at GAR High Command at the time knew all of that, knew we would take the blame but did it anyway. It wasn't because we enjoy failing in our duty. We simply couldn't do anything else. To remember that the Grand Army was created as a response to separatist aggression. The Army and Navy aren't to blame for the situation we are all in. They're the ones fighting and dying to keep us all safe, Tarkin said emphatically. There was something in the way he spoke that garnered everyone's attention. The man never struck me as a charismatic, yet right now he had everyone focusing on him with no effort at all. Damn, the man was a gem. I couldn't believe my luck that he was at Kamino so I could bind him to me. All we hear are excuses. A guildmaster from Heth snapped. You know, you're right, Tarkin agreed. All I can give you are excuses for people who aren't here. Many of them I haven't even met. You want someone to blame? You need not look farther than Coruscant. The Senate created this mess. Chancellor Palpatine did his best to fix as many of the problems the Republic has as he could yet. Sheev Palpatine was one of the few men who earned my deepest respect. However, he was just a man, just you and me. He couldn't produce enough miracles to fix centuries' worth of problems. I can poetically wax to you how the Republic could do no wrong, but we on the Midrim know better. You'll know such lies for what they are. May I ask you something, Prime Minister, Hegemon? Why not all of you? Tarkin looked earnestly at the crowd. What would you have us do to protect your words? Can you change the way the galaxy works? Can you give us enough supplies so once we've secured your systems our ships would be able to resist a separatist counterattack? You know they can't, Zurch sneered. You know that how? I asked mildly. I don't know if they can or can't do it. Do you know better than those who actually wield the words in this region of space? My voice was pleasant and friendly, but for some reason Zurch became the color of puke. Who the hell chose him as a representative and why? Was he a distraction? As loath I am to admit it, he's right. The ambassador from Rintone spoke for the first time. Until now she simply kept quiet and observed the show. Even together we would be unable to keep supplying Admiral Tigellina's fleet to the extent we've been doing it so far for much longer. You brought a whole armada with you, General. We simply lack the assets to supply you too. Admiral Tarkin, do you have a suggestion? I'm familiar with you enough to know you wouldn't point out the obvious without some kind of solution, or was just that in hopes someone here knew something you didn't? A bit of both, Madam Ambassador. Tarkin bowed politely. I can't say I have a solution, nor a plan. However, I do have the beginning of an idea. Are you willing to hear me? What's the use? You're going to run to the core the first chance you get, Zurch sneered. You're right. Unless we find some kind of solution for our supply situation, I would have no choice but plan my immediate departure for the core along with most of the Republic's ships in this system. Admiral Tarkin, can you give me an acceptable alternative? Can any of you? I asked. If not, I'm in the same boat as you. Mandalore depends on the Republic. The fleet under my command might make enough of a difference if I managed to bring it back to the core. There was a lot of muttering, again. This time some of it was surprising. Apparently some people forgot that I was Mandalore, not just another Republic general. What was Tarkin cooking up in that crooked mind of his?